Awesome, awesome. So this panel is going to be about all things delegation and the forefront of governance, right? This is the most hardcore panel happening at this event. Let me introduce some of our guests. First of all, we have Callum and James from FireEye. Please can we get a clap for Callum and James? Thank you. So FireEye is behind some of the really well-known projects such as ENS, Optimism, and they help different projects design their delegate systems, their tokenomics, and all that governance mumbo-jumbo that goes into making successful products great. Very difficult job, and they are the leaders in the industry doing it right now. We're also joined by another James. James is from Protocol Labs. They've made some very small projects such as IPFS or Filecoin, no biggie. They're an R&D lab with a development backbone that's building basically some of the fundamental infrastructure of everything we're using and on a mission to decentralize. These guys are really cool. If you don't know about Protocol Labs, you have to go check them out. Can I get a warm welcome for James, please? Guys, come in, sit down. Seats are limited. Get it while it's hot. What you doing? Where are you going with the backpack? I see you. Come back in. Come on, come on. Zach. Okay, so let's get into it. Right now, we're going through many different iterations, and we're testing lots of new methods in terms of delegation and voting on the market. Let's start with a general topic of how we feel it is going in our products we're working on and the projects we see happening around the ecosphere. Callum, would you like to start us off?
Absolutely. So I think we've kind of entered this phase where, we've built these token delegation systems, like, for example, ENS. When you claimed ENS tokens, you had to pick a delegate, and that's the same with Optimism and the same with a number of projects in the ecosystem. So now we're seeing, these individuals with huge amounts of delegation power within those communities making decisions and hopefully all going to plan, making decisions that represent the people that have delegated to them. But I think, there are a lot of improvements that we can make on that process, because if you imagine, what are there, maybe 50 people who have significant delegation in the ENS ecosystem, those 50 people aren't necessarily the ones with all the answers, right? So I think there's like a lot to build on, in terms of broadening that group who are making decisions. I'm sure we'll get into that a little later on.
Cool, yeah. So I'm also a public goods operator at Wildfire DAO, which these guys built, which is amazing. And we do Gitcoin ENS delegation as well. Thank you. And I think the problem that you see, I think best-in-class practice at the moment in places like Gitcoin is you've got stewards now, and you can see report cards and the health of whether or not these people are very good and you want to delegate to them. But what we don't have is a sort of delegate pipeline where after a season you were we did a shit job in marketing. For the next season, we need someone who's better at marketing. And then you use really good on-chain creds, whether that's DIDs, VCs, or NFTs. And then it shows how somebody has actively added or contributed to marketing in any protocol across the ecosystem, and therefore position themselves better to take over as a delegate in sort of future seasons. So I think that's a big pipeline, that forward look is missing in a lot of communities because they're running around quite crazily sort of now, as it were.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, I can be slightly more controversial. I think that right now, the amount of people that are shitting on governance, where it's oh, it's a useless governance token and it doesn't do anything and we should abandon the whole concept, is yes, right now these token projects are struggling. One, because the number's gone down, and so half the community members that gave a fuck before no longer give a fuck. And second of all is because these systems are really complicated. We only came up with token voting a couple of years ago, right? When we started launching tokens, there wasn't governance at all. It was just oh, let's launch a token and hopefully it does something in the future. And so I think if we're rebuilding the entire corporate governance stack, it's going to take a long time. And we certainly haven't solved it all, but things like that of looking at a delegate and being you never voted and you didn't come to one community call and you didn't add any value to anything. So actually, we want people to delegate away from you, right? That's quite a hard conversation, but it definitely needs to occur, in order to push this stuff forward.
It's a hard conversation, and pragmatically, it's also very hard to pull off. So if we want to pull someone from ENS as a top delegate, that's really difficult to do, to speak to thousands of different token holders and get them to undelegate, right?
Well, and more that it's literally impossible. So some of you might have seen this when Brantley and the ENS drama went on. But basically the idea of if you delegate using compound alpha governor, if you delegate to an address, there's no way to like update that, like force update that delegation, right? Like if you delegate to me, I can't say, I don't want to be a delegate anymore, I'm delegating to Callum, right? The only way to do that is to build a whole new governance module for all these systems and then upgrade the governance, which is like a very, very heavy lift.
Yeah, and it's like, it's almost a victim of, like you were saying, how fast we're doing this, right? Like, you know, if we had known that a situation like this might occur 18 months ago when Governor Alpha or Governor Bravo was written, we could have built in like mechanisms to enable us to fix this, but we didn't. So I think, you know, that's something we have to address over the coming years.
So now we see in the industry, we're taking financial mechanisms to try and improve this. I mean that by recognized delegates. So MakerDAO are the most prominent. They pay their delegates around $300K per annum, all inclusive of bonuses and USDC. But now they have voted, the delegates themselves have voted, to increase that by about 2x, so about $600K total. And the argument for that is efficiency and improvement within the delegation system. What is your opinion on recognized delegates getting paid for delegation, and how should we figure out how much to pay them?
Yeah, I mean, it's a big question. I think the problem is, like, once you delegate to somebody, I might want to delegate to someone on, like, one specific issue that I have super high conviction they'll vote the way that I want them to vote, and that I don't have the ability to engage with that vote proposal during that process. But on a bunch of other issues, I absolutely don't agree with them, and there's no way for me to sort of weight that in saying on this particular issue, let's say on compensation, I want to lean into this particular delegate, but when we're talking about a new sub-DAO, meta-DAO structure, I actually prefer that delegate. So I can't really split my delegation and weight that accordingly to how much conviction I have in the delegate itself. And then I think if you sort of built that in with a couple of layers down, you can then, I think, slightly change the compensation package, because then it's about the number of people and how much weighting there is versus actually how engaged they are. So you sort of shift away from like the value towards value creation than just time spent on chain.
I mean, I would say delegates should be paid. Absolutely, right? Like, if you look at traditional systems, lobbying groups get paid shitloads of money to, like, advise the government or advise, groups on how they should vote. Think tanks do similar kind of thing. They also make fuckloads of money. Consulting companies like McKinsey, similar stuff, also make lots of money. So I think we need to get away from this kind of idea that, governance as a public good is like you should be doing that out of the goodness of your heart and not getting paid for it. But that narrative needs to change.
Yeah, personally, as a delegate, I think delegates should be receiving $10 to $15 million a month. I think that just sent to my address, james.eth, and you can just send it to me, and then I'll be a waiver delegate. I mean, I think I agree with everyone. Like, we do need to start paying them. I kind of wonder whether it should be the companies or the DAOs themselves, and this is something, I mean, I stole this from Shadi, but, like, I think the idea that we, like, these funds that are sitting on, like, tens or hundreds of millions of dollars of these tokens, right? And a lot of these funds literally do nothing. Like, some of the funds, and looking at like what they deliver is less than nothing. They're probably taking away value from the project. And so to think, like, if you have $10 million of ENS tokens in your fund treasury, that you delegate them to FireEyes or to GigaChad. Not GigaChad.
I would take that. Take that.
Yeah, GigaChad. You delegate it to anyone, and then inside of that, maybe it's like once a month, I send you a report of all of the ways that I've voted, right? So here's the things I voted on, and here's the reasons why. And if you want to discuss that with me, come to our open forum and discuss it, right? And for doing that, you're paying me 0.1%, 1% of the total amount of tokens that you hold on a yearly basis, right? That's what happens in traditional like TradFi, right? Is that these managers are taking a clip each year, and yes, we don't want to replicate all of the attributes of TradFi, but I don't know if it should be like Maker themselves, right? Or sort of like ENS themselves that are having to pay out of their pocket. Maybe some of it can be, but I think it should be the bag holders that it should be paying.
So we're speaking a lot about delegation, and the reason why this topic is so prominent right now is because, well, we need to execute. And there's issues like voter apathy and so on that I'm sure we're all familiar with. We're trying different tacks, such as quadratic voting, to get more people engaged and whatnot. Ultimately, delegates are going in one direction, and it seems like a very competitive direction. We now have the advent of service DAOs, right? And now more and more teams are trying to get in. More and more DAOs are creating recognized delegate programs. It seems like compensation is coming along. what do the next steps of delegation look like for you, as you're the ones basically designing the systems?
I mean, I think that like it being organizations and not people, right? Like even so throughout the FireEye's history and all the different token projects we've launched, at the beginning it was like, okay, choose one of you to be the delegate, right? For Gitcoin, when we worked with them, that was the case, right? The Gitcoin team said, you need to pick a single individual to be your delegate, which I think was Cooper. I think it was, anyway, one of us ended up being that delegate, and that was it, right? And he was that delegate, and he is that delegation. But it's actually like, maybe it should be an organization, right? Maybe it shouldn't be one individual that is a delegate. And hopefully, as we move towards these like bigger structures, so for example, like Wildfire, is as opposed to just even delegating to me is sort of the first step, delegating to FireEyes, which is 4 of us, or delegating to Wildfire, which is like a community of like tens, I mean, there's hundreds, but like tens of engaged people. You know, it's actually, that's significantly better, right? And then there can be like an open dialogue of, we're making this decision for this reason, you know, let's talk about it, as opposed to like 2 of us in a room being like, oh yeah, I think we'll vote this way. So I think like organizational delegation.
Yeah, I think we forget that all communities are political. We sort of come into this game and we think that this is not politics in the sort of new age. And when politics happens in communities, you need more skillful operators to get people on side. So they need higher conviction in your ability as a delegate to do what you say you're going to do. And then the larger these organizations get, the more consolidated groups form in like the corners of the organization that are not being engaged with, because everybody's still going about their business. So there needs to be a sort of more reactive process where you sort of look at the overall health of the DAO, look where groups are being consolidated, and then actually change the model, which is that actually we need a delegate who is respected by this enormous 40% of the cohort or the community, that they can then speak for them. And I don't think those structures are quite in place, because everything goes in a very centralized, arbitrary process every few months or every few years. It's not quick enough. And actually, I haven't seen any tools that yet exist to make that happen. You know, like Orca, now Metropolis, doing an amazing job on the sub-DAO side. We're seeing this in Meta-DAO sides. It's a way of fractionalizing those groups. But that's like one part of the problem. What's not being engaged with is actually engaging those enormous groups within the communities and asking them, okay, cool, you guys have not delegated to somebody else. Elect somebody within your community who you respect and then can work with a delegate to ensure all of your voices are heard. And this sort of political navigation, I think, is missing a little bit in some of the larger DAOs.
Yeah, to kind of build on what James was saying, I think it's really interesting that we have like, you know, the ENS token to govern the whole of ENS, right? Or the Gitcoin token to govern the whole of Gitcoin, where there are like eight work streams across like the Gitcoin ecosystem, approximately. You know, maybe I don't want to delegate my tokens and my governance weight to one group to govern all 8 of those work streams. So I think like figuring out ways that we can, you know, kind of break down the governance power and break down the governance mechanisms so that you can distribute, you know, I think my treasury management voting weight should go to Llama. I think my like Metagov power should go to Wildfire, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Yeah, and that was like James's point as well, is like the fact that we can't do that is, you know, like when we developed these systems, we were trying to develop like an MVP, right? It's like, okay, we need a way to govern Compound initially. It's like, okay, how do we govern these like protocol parameters, right? Well, you can have a vote, you can delegate the vote, and that's it. And you know, things like being able to update delegation, for example, if I don't want to be a delegate, we just didn't include. The idea to have like liquid democracy, right? All those sort of like liquid voting ideas where different ideas and different concepts I can delegate my votes to accordingly. And these are steps that's like sort of a technical step. You know, like sure there's like UI improvements and like community improvements, but the fact is right now we cannot do that inside of all token, or basically all token projects. And that's like a very heavy lift. To upgrade the governance contract for all governance tokens that exist is like not a small feat. And I think like that basically needs to happen, and just for those 2 things, right? And then we can be sitting here in another 2 years going, okay, well now we have liquid democracy and we have, you know, the ability to update delegates, but we're missing this, and this. And then we have to do this massive lift again to update the contracts. And I think that's sort of like a feature, not a bug. You know, it's similar to like Moloch DAO and a lot of the really early DAOs where you start with like nothing. Start with as little code as you need and then slowly add to it as you need these features, which although is going to be painful, does mean that, like, you know, governor hasn't broken, right? If the governor contract broke and all governance for all of these tokens blew up, we would be fucked. You know, it would be a really, really big problem. And so, like, although it's painful, I think it's just like the step-by-step, year-by-year approach.
Is anyone here designing a delegate system right now for their DAO? Sorry, Deepa. Okay, first name.
I'm Koga from Paladin DAO. So we already have first layer of tokenomics and delegation implemented in the token that staked and stuff. But yeah, we didn't went through the whole having a governor of Bravo or any type of stuff right now because we're still trying to figure out like what's needed more than just the basic delegation we have right now. We just have that delegation and snapshot on top of it. And yeah, as you guys said, that's a really tricky point to say like, okay, where do we stop we might need that feature and just go.
So what would you say your biggest challenge is right now?
Well, in the first thing was also to get delegates, get people in the community to engage and to attract all the other passive token holders to delegate to them, to explain why they would be trusted with their voting power and their decision power. And then like right now on the technical side, when designing the rest of the governance system is basically how we want it to interact with the rest of the DAO and the rest of the product, and how we want it to evolve like later on. Like, do we want to have tiers of participants? So some delegates that when trusted by more of the community members, or because they are more active in votes and they just don't come when the vote is active, no participation forum or whatever, and just click the yes button because they just saw it. Like, how do we make that more attractive for those participants, and how we make them like interact more with the community?
It's interesting. Like, I wonder if that is the answer. You know, the previous question topic was about like, you know, how can we like improve these governance systems, right? And like liquid democracy and updating delegates. I wonder if actually a really good idea for any project is basically just like add it, because it's not that hard. Like the complexity of adding that to Governor Bravo, in my non-technical knowledge, isn't actually that difficult. And so maybe a cool idea is like new projects should just start ripping it. And new projects just like launch with like updated delegation and liquid democracy. And the liquid democracy is maybe harder, but you know, launching with that and then being like, yes, all of you other projects that are doing governance, you suck because you're not doing this correctly. And you sort of like, like the SushiSwap, Uniswap example, you sort of like force projects to update their governance by showing them in new projects how like you should do it.
Yeah, for sure. Fully agree with that. And then also, just like, what on earth needs to be like actually voted upon is not like communities don't take the time initially when they're building to go, what is like a foundational vote for the DAO and what's just like a sort of quick fire operational issue. And they don't differentiate between the two, which means you just have these like super crazy voting processes on literally stuff that makes no sense. And on the meta governance stuff, no one's engaged. But as soon as you put up someone's compensation package, fucking 90% of the DAO are like, oh my God, like, and then the forums are going crazy. And it's like, why are you voting on compensation and not the really important meta governance structures? Like, that to me is baffling, but it says more about human behavior. So it's like, how do you get that same engagement on compensation and like move that interest into like other areas of the DAO? I think to me, that's just like a big problem in the ecosystem.
Yeah, definitely +1 on that. A thought that came to mind as you were speaking, James, was like, the problem is that Compound devs wrote Governor Alpha, Governor Bravo, but Compound doesn't need any of this like extra bells and whistles governance wizardry. So we almost need to find, you know, a correct incentive to have other teams take that code and build on top of it and actually experiment with it. Because as you say, there haven't really been examples of that like experimentation on top of those contracts that are used like across the ecosystem. So do we put out like a FireEye's wildfire bounty on people playing with those contracts and building cool governance stuff? Was my question.
Just quickly on that, like grants is broken, and like it's the same. Like there's a lot of problems in communities. You mentioned like these DAOs that sit with like 10 million in the treasuries, and there's a big conversation about diversification of treasuries, which obviously needs to be done. Absolutely, fully agree with that. But at the same time, it's like invest back into your communities, like put grants and bounties out to come up with innovative ideas to help solve your community and others. And there's not that enough conviction, and then no one's really thinking about the sort of post-grant space of like incubating or actually accelerating super interesting like venture backable ideas, because we're all stuck in this free money world. And I think that's a massive gap. Like anywhere like beyond like 40K for grants to 100K on acceleration, there's like such amazing experimentation that can be done with like sick projects that are definitely venture backable that also VC money would be interested in, or community funds can be put into, and that could actually net benefit the DAO in the future. But everyone's terrified to make those high conviction bets, especially in the market. So you not sort of need like, you know, braver people to sort of stand up ultimately in these communities and say difficult things.
Agree. And it's also like, I mean, and to the point you brought up before, of like anytime money comes up, it's like such a spooky conversation. It's like, it can be about giving a grant out. It can be about how much I should get paid as a delegate. It should be how much I could get paid as a developer. It really doesn't matter. People are like, completely, you know, complete voter apathy when it comes to any vote on like shit that actually matters. Upgrading some protocol, right? Where it's like, if you upgrade this protocol wrong, you fuck everything. And no one votes on it at all. And then if it's like, oh, we want to give a $10,000 grant, and again, it's a human psychology thing of like, no, I should be getting that money. Why are we giving it out to these random people? Like, no, that could be going to me. This is my DAO treasury. And I think like, that's just something that we have to, it's like communication basically, and sort of hard lines. You know, we need like this brutal conversation of, sorry, you didn't perform as a delegate, you're getting kicked out. Sorry, we need this money, for, we need to spend 100K on this, we're doing it, shut up. You know, and actually like that sort of attitude I think is missing from DAOs because we're also peaceful, right? The whole Ethereum community and the DAO space is like so lovely and so open, which is fantastic, but then it means when like hard topics come out, we sort of like shut in and we're like, oh no, I can't talk about this, like this is too scary and this is about money and you know, someone's going to get offended here, which is true, and we sort of have to, you know, we need to lean into our Solana roots a little bit more and be, you know, like terrible money people a little bit, and have a little bit of spice of terrible money people, so that then we can actually like execute correctly.
I have to say, I never thought I'd hear you say that on stage.
Yeah. We can be a little bit Solana-y and we can have money conversations and then quickly go back to the Ethereum side of the camp. Yeah, good. Fuck yeah. Solana.
But to build on that, like, this is what these DAO treasuries were made for, right? If you go back to the documentation, the blog posts, the white papers, all of these things that were, you know, written about and planned for before the tokens were launched, before there were thousands of community members who, you know, felt entitled to have an opinion, this is what we were doing with that money, right? It was like funding community initiatives, building new technology, making new experiments. So, like, how do we, you know, take those words from those pieces of paper and, like, blast it to the forefront and say, hey, look, this is what we said we were going to do. This is what we're doing, so get used to it.
Well, and also the fact that, like, these DAO treasuries, you know, are so small. Like, sure, they might be worth, like, tens of millions of dollars, even, like, billions in some case of dollars. But, you know, the total market cap of crypto is, like, less than $1 trillion, right? Maybe when we get to, like, 20 trillion as a total market cap, we can be like, okay, now we'll start talking about dividends and how, you know, as a token holder, I can get some value back from this treasury. But, you know, and that's why people are so, like, you know, skittish in order to give money out, is because they're like, oh, no, this should be going to me, I'm the token holder. And, like, agree, actually, you know, they're all fucking securities. And, like, you know, and we should be giving money, you know, to all tokens are securities, you know, like 100%, you know, and, but I think that, like, yeah, you know, I don't have a fund, I'm not worried, you know, and I think that, like, you know, that is the case. And, you know, we shouldn't be worried about giving money back to token holders or incentivizing token holders. We should be worried about growing the pie and, you know, building more pie.
James's reviews reflect James, not all Jameses. I'd just like to make that really clear. As a representative of the James Guild, you know, these are individual views. Like, what's the solution here? So, like, let's take lessons from things like even Web3 venture studios, venture builders, right? They take an idea that they know intimately within a community, right? They nucleate an idea which they understand way better than any outside entity, and then they make that as good as they can, and then bring in outside capital, resource, mentorship, whatever it is, to then enable that to grow. I think what we don't see is like one DAO saying, this thing is a really big problem for us, but we really intimately understand that. We'd like to nucleate it, but do it in a public way and incentivize a couple of other DAO communities to come together and say, oh, we've got a really good founder here or a mentor that can make that better who's done X. And then they all come together and create a really fucking cool solution. They all fund it. They all benefit from it. And this like best practice sharing, like everyone's trying to create the best DAO, as opposed to like the best sort of foundation for all DAOs to succeed. And I'd like to like incentivize people to move into that way, and you need to put capital behind it. So, yeah.
What I'm hearing is very interesting, and controversial topics seem to do the best when it comes to forum posts, and the ones that are controversial, the ones that everyone can participate in. Everyone can understand business lingo and can kind of evaluate whether it's worth paying 20K for a marketer. no one can evaluate whether it's worth making a protocol change, maybe like 20 people, and like 5 of those are in the protocol at any given time, right? So even if it comes to getting feedback from your delegate and understanding if they're doing the right thing is quite figuratively impossible, right? Because you just don't have that fundamental knowledge. And if we look at DAOs like Nouns DAO, for example, does anyone know Nouns DAO? Yeah, very popular project. They have a very popular community and governance forum, and why? Because it's all, business cases, like, oh, I want to make a t-shirt company out of Nouns, I want to make glasses out of Nouns, and they get tons of engagement from the community, and everyone feels like they can participate. But it also feels like they're just shooting money into the toilets. What do you guys think?
I think we need more honest delegates. Like, if I'm a delegate and I'm not an expert on treasury diversification, I should just stand up and go, look, I don't actually understand this as intimately as this other delegate that I also have high conviction on. So everybody who supports me will understand this rationale, because I actually want to almost like further delegate my delegated responsibilities to that person that I know intimately understands it and will make a way better informed decision. But so many delegates are like, oh my God, I've been given all this responsibility, I need to vote on it, do not understand a lot of these complexities, especially on the treasury side, and like protocol upgrades, and they're just like sort of voting on stuff with the crowd. So they wait for someone to move and then they follow, and then the whole DAO has just followed like 1 or 2 people, which is like the most centralized process in the world. So like, yeah, I'll speak to that at the meta level as opposed to Nouns on like an individual basis.
I think Nouns is cool. I mean, I think like Nouns kind of is just like deleting money, and that's like almost the purpose. Like that's, I mean, if you can sell a little picture on the internet every day for 60 ETH, then like may as well burn some. You're printing enough money that like who cares? And actually, it's like I think maybe in an end state, Nouns is in a position where they want to start making revenue, or they want to start being sort of like a value accruing thing. But in the meantime, it's just about sort of like growing that and like getting it spread worldwide, crypto worldwide. And then at that point, it's like, okay, now we have 1% of the total world that care about this problem, or care about nouns. Now we can start generating revenue by throwing noun raves, and you pay $200 a ticket or whatever. Like I think they're in the stage of throw money away and make an impact, and then eventually it'll turn to a for-profit model. I would guess, but I don't know. Ask Patricio.
Yeah, I agree. I think a lot of other DAOs who have lots of money should take lessons from Nouns and spend that money, as we were saying before, on doing cool shit in the community. Right, like Nas DAO, which is like a skateboarding, surfing, snowboarding initiative collective that came out of Nouns, went, I think, yesterday to a skate park in New York and gave out 100 skateboards to kids. And like things like that, may not get the DG and crypto Twitter people talking, or like the deep protocol people talking, but it gets like normal people being like, wait, so how you like, got money from this internet collective thing, and then you made a bunch of custom skateboards, and now you're giving me one for free? Like, that's really cool. Maybe I should look into it.
Yeah, and on the spending money point as well, is I think like more DAOs need to be focused on that. A really good example of that is for Metacartel. So hopefully some people are familiar with Metacartel. It's a grant-giving DAO. We give away money to cool Ethereum projects. And actually Griff Green, who might not be here, but Griff Green, who some people might know from Giveth and a bunch of different communities, really early on in Metacartel's piece, I think we only had like a couple of $100,000 in the DAO total, which I guess it is now. And we were, giving out these grants and spending this money. And he was like, spend it as fast as you can. Like $200,000 is sure a lot of money if you put it in my back pocket, but like as a community, if we're doing cool shit, it's a very small amount of money. And if you can actually spend all of that, make it go down to zero, it'll be very clear of either the impact was worth it and people want to put in more money because it was a cool experiment, or it's done and we shouldn't fund it anymore. It'll become very clear at zero whether it was worth it or not. So like spending the money, 100%.
Yeah, and then I think I saw something from Ian at Syndicate DAO saying there's only 2.5 million active wallets, right? So like 2.4,999,070 more than Decentraland, which is very funny. Sorry, niche joke. And what that means is either you have to win the majority of the 2.5 existing million people that hold wallets as a DAO, like you have to incentivize them to come to you as a community, enough of a majority, or you have to win a very small subsection of that, but like super high conviction people on the like, Kevin Kelly, 100 True Fans model, or it means you need to increase the net number. You need to go more than 2.5 million, which means you need to do cool shit to attract people who are like, I don't even know what a fucking DAO is, but I love skateboarding. How can I get involved? And then like DAO, Shred DAO, and all these other things will start popping up. And then a whole community that is not involved in Web3 in any such a way can come in and be a part of something and then start to delegate and start to get involved. And you sort of create that like evangelist or evaluator to evangelist flywheel. So I think that sort of speaks volumes as well.
Fascinating. I mean, where we're moving now is definitely an interesting direction. Lots of tests taking place. If we think about the history up until now, for example, we had cooperatives or university endowment funds, right? It's like normal businesses that do work in a somewhat decentralized manner. They incorporate different bodies, right? In 2013, we had the precursor to DAOs. We had DAs and DACs, if anyone read the BitShares forums back in 2013, right? These were the original inceptions of what DAO should be. Now we have everything's a DAO. My question to the panel is, are there any DAOs, and what's the best one?
Am I going first? Are there any DAOs? I think yes. I think DAOs, the term DAO can be whatever you want it to be, right? If you're coordinating between humans and you're doing that in like a productive way, call yourself a DAO, whatever, that's fine. Best DAOs, Wildfire, but that's a biased opinion. I think Metacartel for spurring the regrowth and rebirth of DAOs and being purely focused on giving money away and building the ecosystem and not having any like speculative nature built into the mechanism.
Yeah, I think to my mind, like loot is probably the only like full loot. You know, the sort of like, right, we're going to leave a bunch of things and then step away from it and let the community decide what those subsequent weapons became and NFTs in games, etc. Was probably the only like fully decentralized organization or autonomous organization that then was like created out of nowhere. But like, and so I agree with Callum. There are DAOs, but this is a process, right? This is that progressive decentralization that Variant Fund and others talk about quite a lot. And you have to understand that it is a process. And, first you create it should often be quite a centralized process of really creating something intentional and then slowly giving away that ownership and empowering more people and then creating a lot of space for future leaders to come in. So like someone that does this really well is like DAO House or Warcamp DAO on Moloch, because like, the OGs, they're enabled for like Spencer to come through and then have a voice. And they did that because they're leader-full. They're not a leaderless organization. I think a lot of people get that wrong about DAOs. There should be a multitude of leaders, and there should be space for more leaders to come through. And so, like, if a community is progressively decentralizing, giving up more autonomy and giving up a little bit more sort of organization and ownership to others, they can call themselves a DAO, and without having to be like the ultimate, DAO, DAC, whatever framework. So yeah, I think they do exist, and there's now so many use cases for DAOs of the 5,000 like solid DAOs that there are, and not just on the like types where you think about protocol or investment or grants. There's like ephemeral, there's Flash, there's like so many different ways to think about them more holistically that I think we all need to like take a step back and go, cool, how can we think about these in ways that are new and exciting? So yeah, I think there are.
Yeah, I mean, I think we have like O's, like we have the O part of DAO pretty well down. We have organizations, definitely. Like, are they decentralized? Well, we're just talking about the fact that it's like 5 delegates that run like most of them, right? So they're not that decentralized. Are they autonomous? Like, definitely not. I mean, they use smart contracts to upgrade themselves, but they're relying on the centralized people to do that. So they're not that autonomous, but they are organizations. So at least we have organizations. But I think that like, who cares? It's a good name. It's a good meme. Is when you're at the skate park giving away. I don't know why you're going like this. I think it's a really good meme. I mean, I'm happy to give you a mic and like have that discussion. But no, I'm serious. But I think that like, if you go to a skate park and you're giving away a skateboard and you say, well, I have this collaborative, well, I have this collaborative effort, and with the collaborative effort, what we're doing is, we have a company and then we distribute. It's so complicated to try and explain that. If you just have a short, sweet tagline of this is a DAO. What's a DAO? Well, it's like a Web3 community that does cool shit. Well, how decentralized is it? Don't worry, it's a DAO. I think like by we are so early. DAOs, people only give a fuck about DAOs for like 2 years, 3 years. Fine. In 20 years, in 10 years, let's start being more careful around what is and what isn't and what the different structures are. But for now, let's like run with the meme and like let it explode and let's go to skate parks all around the world and get all the skaters in the universe excited about what this is and why they got a free skateboard. Let's go to different communities and clean up rubbish and say that it was a DAO that was cleaning up the rubbish. Let's like spread this meme and get people excited about it and get the Zoomers that are like playing Fortnite all day to start talking about DAOs, and then we're done. Then we've solved the problem, and then we can start addressing like more like clinical things that probably you're gonna say.
I really like that approach, and it makes a lot of sense. And in a way, it's also anarchistic to say, I'm not going to push this. There's a lot of ways to do it. I'm not going to put ideology on it and so on. But to play devil's advocate, we have a responsibility, right, for what we're building. And if we're building something that is fake and is not a DAO, and I can sign whatever transaction I want, maybe I should have a responsibility to say, this is where we're going, but currently, yeah, it's a community and organization and so on. And I'll... about the questions for later.
It's really funny, the concept of decentralization, because we'd all agree, something is more decentralized if more people, let's say, vote on a motion, right? Vote on a proposal. But if there's one person that is messaging all of those people to vote in order for it to be more decentralized, that's sort of faux decentralization, right? So it's really ironic that often the communities have to actively engage lots of people to make something decentralized in terms of voting on proposals. I think I fully agree with that. I half agree with James and I half agree with you, because I think we need both. I think we need people who are just fuck it, let's just get as many people in this world, whether that's on, humanitarian projects or really interesting stuff that's happening in LATAM in particular, cool fertilization initiatives or whatever it is, going out to the coffee fields and sort of creating communities and getting more people interested, absolutely the high level, and worry about this stuff later. But at the same time, we need really intentional people to design super interesting coordination mechanism initiatives, which will really benefit us in the future. And I think we need both, and both need to talk to each other, I think, a bit better.
Can I just jump on that as well? Is I think that that's why I think fuck Solana, right? That's why if someone's talking about their DAO that's built on a blockchain that can stop, or Binance Smart Chain, right? You can just pause the blockchain. That's where I really agree, right? If you're building a DAO on a technology stack that can just pause whenever they want, then it's not a real DAO. And also, if it's a multi-sig that's a 1 of 5 where one person can sign it, that should also be called out. And I agree. And I am a brutal person on Twitter to be no, this is shit, very centralized, lame. And so I think everything should be allowed to call themselves a DAO. We should also be very into roasting things and being you can call yourself that, but you're not. I think both. Agree.
Hi. So my question is, who came up with the idea of delegation voting? Whose idea was it? Because it looks like everybody just embraced delegation voting, but who came up with it originally? And I also think that voting in DAOs need to be re-looked into, because sometimes you have people voting on matters that have no expertise in that area. For instance, marketing. Somebody's voting on marketing matters, but comes from he's a software engineer, right? And software engineers are mostly, they're coders. They love building stuff. So how do they know what's being voted upon in the marketing stream is best for marketing or things like that?
Thank you.
I mean, I think that we don't, and the idea of delegation, I think, is sort of a natural outcome. I mean, we only have 2.5 million wallets or whatever that number is of actual people that are actively engaged, and so already that's at a stage where if all of them are voting, it's so impractical. And so delegation, I think one answer is that it's a practical way to bubble to the top good information. But I agree, everyone shouldn't be voting on everything, and these sort of sub-DAOs. I mean, my opinion, the end game of all governance is that you have a tradable governance token, and then you have non-tradable things on top of that, right? So that could be verifiable credentials, that could be soul-bound NFTs, and those act as multipliers. So you can imagine that I have 10 tokens and you have 100 tokens, but I also have a treasury management NFT, right? Or I've been here for 5 years NFT. And so I actually get, 5 times my vote weight. And so I actually end up with 50 tokens worth of vote weight. And so I end up actually having a voice. That is what will occur. It's just that we need the technology stack to actually enable that.
Yeah, I think delegation basically came around as the first solution that we could think of that would work to address the fact that if you have direct token voting, you just can't get everyone to vote. You can hardly get anyone to vote, and the people who know what they're talking about only have the same governance weight as any other token holder. And I think what James said does sound like the most likely outcome, where every token might have the same governance weight, but every contributor and every group will have different weights based on which areas of the community or the DAO they have specialized knowledge in.
I think it also probably came from a bit of a lack of imagination because of the history of what, democracy has been for the last few hundred years, right? And we took, okay, cool, democracy, one person, one vote, and lots of things didn't really work. And then it was like, how do you make things more active, right? We want active democracy, or no, maybe more participatory democracy. And then that sort of got slightly confused within the same semantic field. And it was like, oh, cool, the decentralization and democratization are very similar. So we can take the same initiatives that we've built, Web 1, Web 2, and then just like build on top of it with new primitives that can be done before. And that to me is like a lack of imagination, right? What we have the ability to completely redesign human coordination, right? And we've got ourselves stuck, especially in like, the liberal Western world where we have the ability to think in these terms and we really hold them sacrosanct. To just be way more innovative about what like democratization or delegation is. I mean, it makes sense that there's so much activity and only so many people can really understand what's going on at one given time. But then you run into the same faux pas of like, is that the right person to be doing the right thing? But I'm definitely in the market for like way newer ideas that don't rely on the history that we've all like signed a social contract to. I don't know what they are, quite frankly, because again, I'm trying to like unlearn what I've learned at school and socialization and throughout my limited adult life to like be more like, a vocal advocate for interesting shit. And so anyone who's doing that, again, like, let's give them some fucking money. I don't care where it comes from, but like, go and build like really cool shit and across communities and like cross-fertilize ideas and cross-share best practices. And like, let's continue to experiment. Like, I will use the example of Polygon because Polygon do lots of experimentation. That's why they're really successful. They burn a shit ton, but they're really successful because they're like, cool, go and try a new roll-up. Go and try this CK thing. Like, whatever, they really back it. And they're like, cool, gaming's great. Let's hire Ryan. Let's go and do a studios thing. Let's go on the accelerator for Disney. Let's go wild. Like, that is awesome, and that's what we're all signed up to, and we can afford to do it. So like, let's like be, as James said, like a little bit more forward-leaning on like money. Let's think of that as value that is being created in the future, not value that I otherwise could have now. So it's a bit of a social shift of thinking, at least in my mind, and that's probably a bit of a biased view. Yeah, concentrated power in the hands of delegates. Fully agree. Oh, how long do they serve on the terms? Yeah, it depends on, obviously, by communities. And I think what we were saying at the beginning, I don't know if you caught it, but it was how do we solve that? How do we enable more real-time updates of like, if someone is doing a crap job, they should lose their value accrual in a community should go down, they should be replaced. And then communities should be way more cutthroat in the ability to do that. And also at the same time, delegates should be more honest and say, look, for whatever reason, I don't have the capacity to engage with this. I'd like to put that up for a vote and I can come back when I am. And that to be way more acceptable, but there needs to also be consistency because institutional knowledge in these communities is also really important. So anything that can solve that, I think we're in the market for.
Or reviewing the delegates. That's another problem,
Exactly.
right? Like you might have these delegates and they have the power to vote on matters, and then there's a review, delegate review comes up, and then how engaged is the rest of the community in reviewing the delegates, because people are lazy and they might not be actively participating in reviewing the delegates. And so these delegates continue to stay in power and they are it's centralized again. And also I feel like every DAO is of different size. Like the DAOs that y'all are talking about are maybe really, really big, like where there are token holders and stuff like that. But then I'm from the impact DAO space, and the DAOs aren't that big. And so there are different voting styles that are coming up there. And I feel like they're really rethinking voting from ground up rather than just taking delegation voting and applying it to their DAO.
Definitely, if they're small, I completely agree. But for those small DAOs, you don't even need delegation. You don't even need voting. If the DAO's less than like 50 people, 100 people, then just like send some messages around and be like, well, what do you think? Does this make sense? Or get on a call, get them all on a call.
That's what we do. So I'm
Totally.
Impact DAO Media. We put out all our ideas on Discord, and people just use emojis to vote with. And if they don't agree, we just open a thread. We keep discussing till the time everybody agrees.
Definitely.
So we generally don't do snapshot or anything of that sort.
Yes, well, it's kind of a comment. You were talking a little bit about like the time frame of an investment, right? And I did an MBA during the last financial collapse. And one of the things that we talked about a lot in the business world is that in like TradFi, we kind of moved to like, investors looking at stock, it's about the next quarter's earnings, right? And so somehow over the last like 30 or 40 years in the West particularly, like our idea of investing has always been very short term. We're thinking about the next 3 months, the next 6 months. And then, I guess like CZ did a Bankless podcast. And there was a lot of this kind of conversation about, like centralization and how central finance is and whatnot. And his point was, like we need to onboard more people, and like in order to do that, we need to have this like 20 or 30-year investment time frame, right? And so like it's a challenge of like trying to figure out how to be more decentralized while also like being able to think in terms of such a long investment time frame. And I think you were talking about like the West, and I do think like that very like short-termist thing is a pretty Western problem at the moment. And actually, like if you go out to the East and you look at other places, like there are people that are thinking more in terms of decade-long investments. And I don't know how we get there, but that really seems like the direction we need to go.
Yeah, there's something called the Hofstadter Index, which came out of a professor at Harvard in, I think, the late 20th century, which obviously looked at different societies, communities, whatever, and whether or not they're short-term or long-term oriented, whether they are more individualistic or collective, etc. And I think, yeah, obviously West versus very simplistic, but like West versus East, as what came out obviously very short-term, very individualistic in the West, and then very long-term and collective oriented in places in the East. If you look at a traditional fund in terms of like you're an LP into a fund that has to deploy X amount of capital very quickly over X number of years on a vesting schedule, right? Their job is often to just get that money out of the door as quick as possible at the highest conviction bets, and then sit back and then hope that will pay a dividend in the future in whichever investments they've made, i.e. their portfolio companies, to help them succeed and add lots of value, right? I don't think that is limited to the West. I think that's fund structures across the world, but there is definitely a risk appetite of like the immediacy of capital because we've become so oversensitized to like, we need to immediate returns, immediate gratification. And I think that's definitely a cultural thing that we need to resolve. But I don't think that applies necessarily to just the West and on a capital basis. And I think we need to be beyond capital because it's not just like what's the quick fix to anything. Which is why I always think take your time building a DAO. Like if you're building a DAO, whip it up and spin it up and do whatever, cool. But at the same time, if you really, really want to be intentional about it, don't necessarily start pretty decentralized and trying to get autonomous as soon as possible. Be really intentional and build all of these, like build law, build culture, build memes. Like really, are these the right people that you want at the epicenter initially? How do you go through the tiers in becoming a core contributor? Like really think through those, have frameworks that are really considered, and then slowly move towards progressive decentralization, learning on the way, but setting up structures which enable like really quick actions to happen. So yeah, replace delegate, cool, deploy capital for that cool project. And those tools I think are missing a little bit.
Yeah, that was exactly what I was going to say. I think, we all want to make long-term bets and push towards the long-term future and viability of everything that we're building. But we also are kind of like hamstrung by this, the tooling and the infrastructure and the technology, which doesn't lend itself to being like changed, upgraded, modified very easily. So like, as you said, maintaining some level of like, centralization and like agility and nimbleness is, I think, important so that we can, move fast and do lots of things in the short term, but then still be able to look to the long term and change things as we go.
Very good question. Thank you. Okay, so a quick change of pace because we've all been sitting down a while. We're going to do some rapid fire questions, okay? They're not going to be controversial at all. First question, what tool's better, Guild or Collabland?
Collabland.
I love Raz and Rekka at Guild, so I'm going to say Guild.
I'll say both. I think Guild for like more Web3 centric, cool things, and Collabland for more Web2 centric communities that need to scale.
If you've never worked in a DAO, should you be building DAO tooling?
Yeah, sure. I mean, if you've got a cool idea, rip it.
Yeah, try and get input from people who have worked in DAOs, or work in a DAO alongside what you're doing.
Yeah, 100%. If it's only people who've ever worked in DAOs, no new ideas. So you need new people, new ways of thinking to come in and challenge the existing status quo.
Do we need new acronyms to describe our organizations?
No. I mean, maybe, who knows? It doesn't matter. I don't think it matters at all.
No, I agree. Like, just a slight tangent. There's a new a new startup in the Filecoin ecosystem called Big Data Energy, BDE. Big Data Energy, Big Data Exchange sometimes, and obviously they were on the stage pitching to investors, we're BDE, and everyone went, and they did a fantastic raise off the back of it. So it's like, it doesn't really matter, but, maybe.
Yeah, I think to the point earlier, keep using the term DAO and just meme the shit out of it. We like it.
Should DAOs continue to give out lots of free T-search as merch for brand awareness?
I'm actually a like non-t-shirt, non-hat merch maxi. So like if you're giving out something that isn't a t-shirt and isn't a hat, then I think you have a cooler DAO.
Yeah, there was Optimism skipping ropes at the hackathon. Sick. I got 2 skipping ropes. They're actually tiny too. I can't even use it, but it's cool.
Yeah, I think as a group, like skateboards are obviously something I think we're going to collectively give out as Wildfire DAO.
Okay, that was the rapid fire section. Thank you. James brought up a really interesting point earlier, and he was speaking almost about how you can create the vessel for a governance system, and people have to go and fill it in themselves and figure it out, almost like an organic method. And when I asked you guys the question, what's the best DAO? Well, for me, the best DAO is actually Yearn, and the signal for that was when they all fired themselves. When we speak about engagement in DAOs, it's usually around compensation and staying in the DAO and retaining power. Yearn is the only DAO I know of that hit the bear market and was like, okay, let's, at a C level, at every level, let's fire ourselves. So my question to the panel is, are we going to see fair launch style DAOs become more popular in the future?
Definitely. I mean, Yearn, I think, is a cool experiment, and I very much like the technology. Will it be around in 5-10 years? Like, I don't know. You know, like, it was definitely very cool, but is it that sustainable because of how YOLO it was launched? Not sure. But definitely, like, those fair launch models are very cool. And, you know, it's funny, like, we were talking about it yesterday, but the idea of, like, initially when token sales started popping up, it was literally like you went to the website, you got the address, and you sent money to it. And whoever could send the money quickest, initially who could send the money quickest would win. And then it became whoever could use the most gas and who wanted to pay the most would win. Like the basic attention token, like Brave, and it sold out in one block, one single Ethereum block, and it was like $80 million was raised instantly. And so, like, that was cool and that was open. And then we were like, oh, no, we're doing these public, you know, offerings and they're scary. And then we went back to the VC model, right? Where, like, most tokens at launch now, they have a seed and then a pre-seed and then a Series A, and then they do some, like, public sale to the community, which is okay. But actually, like, the previous ones in 2017, the communities were getting a better rate than the investors because they were just aping in on day one. And so, you know, I do think that, like, doing these new, like, community-centric launches where, you know, I mean, like, airdrops are a great example of that, right? For, like, ENS, of my mum being like, how did I get $20,000 of ENS tokens? This doesn't make sense. Like, am I in a scam? What's happening? It's like, no, mum. The reason, yes, I designed you a scam. No, the reason, mum, that you got $20,000 is because they'd never sold them to investors, right? No ENS tokens were ever sold to investors, which meant when they hit the market, all of the VC firms that are sitting on more money than they ever have been had to force buy it on market, right? They had to go to the market and buy it from my mum, which meant that it made the token go up. So I think like these like either doing a distribution, an airdrop, or like different kind of distribution mechanisms like Yearn is very, very cool for like enabling a new wave of community and like DAO ownership.
Yeah, I think like +1, but we need to just continue to iterate on what those mechanisms are. You know, like if we were to drop a token in the same way that Yearn did right now, I would say that the vast majority of that token supply would be acquired by like not necessarily sophisticated investors as in VCs and like TradFi people, but like very smart people who have a lot of resources who know how to like, you know, manipulate those on-chain mechanisms to acquire all of those tokens. So like, you know, a lot of the conversations around like soulbound tokens and like, you know, having community members earn before they get a financial reward and like become involved before there's a speculative asset at play. I think we need to like continue down that path.
Yeah, I think we're not going to get more people into Web3 and DAOs by showing the synthetics governance model. I have a cardiac arrest every time I look at a visual of that, or synthetics' governance model. Like, I've not fucking no idea what's going on. It's like the Battle of the Somme, which is like, but they're amazing. And when does a level of complexity become too complex to be used in the community? And I use an example that we spun out of Protocol Labs, which was SourceCred, which is an incredibly complex and considered tool for compensation and evaluating contribution. but a majority of people would use Coordinate because it was very easy to understand. And the source cred devs didn't necessarily understand why more communities were not understanding this really, really amazing initiative that built in cryptographic primitives that were like cutting edge. And there's an element of like, you need to look at the audience you're trying to communicate to. And I think a little bit like Yearn is a great example, but you have to have a really deep understanding of governance to understand how that works. And like, you wouldn't come into Yearn and be like, oh, I know exactly what I'm doing now. You'd be running around like a headless chicken. So I think it's like, like Yearn is amazing, as are lots of other DAOs that do things very simply. Joke DAO, really good example, what David spun up. Like, fucking love the mechanisms there, and it's got really interesting and is being forked now. Like, we should cherish and celebrate these, and hold dear how innovative they all are in their unique ways, and then let people like find the community that works for them. Like, I want to join a community. It's about the vibes. It's about what they're doing, but it's also about the mechanics, like the actual, can I navigate this DAO and actually add value in the way I want to? And if I can't, I'm probably not going to get engaged, or if I am, I'm going to like leave quite quickly. So,
very interesting. Earlier you mentioned that there's a proliferation of all new different types of DAOs, right? So we're not just focused on protocol level DAOs or these types of things anymore. Now it's coming to impact DAOs, social DAOs, etc., product DAOs, etc., etc. In 2023 and beyond, we might see things such as DAO M&A or even just DAO to DAO services. What do you guys see as the next evolution of DAO collaboration and maturity?
I mean, I think like I'm incredibly excited about, so like Hydra Ventures, so Metacartel Ventures. Initially there was Metacartel, we gave out grants. Then there was Metacartel Ventures, we were like, okay, we gave out grants, now let's do the same thing, but let's do investments. And then there was Hydra, which is basically the next level up of that, which is going to be an investment DAO which only invests in other investment DAOs, right? So the hypothesis is that many, many investment DAOs will spin up, and Hydra can sort of invest, their many heads of Hydra can invest into all these different DAOs. That is very exciting. Right now there's like a handful of investment DAOs that exist, excluding all of the ones from the layer. From like Consensus, which are basically like pretend DAOs with DAOs sprinkled on top of it. But there's a few decent ones that exist, and we should scale that. And so Wildfire, probably what we'll do is spin that into an investment DAO, right? We're sort of like the community of people that care about governance and care about the projects that we're aligned with can actually start investing, and not only investing, right, but also like providing services. So when we make an investment into a project, it's not like, hey, here's some money, now we go away. It's like, hey, here's some money and we've built a mechanism to be aligned with you for 5-10 years. And so I think like this next wave of like service/investment DAOs that sort of are both of those things at the same time is like incredibly, and that will 2023 and 2024, we will see a lot of like hundreds of those.
An idea that came out of Ven's workshop, I think he left, I want to give him a shout out, that came out of Ven's workshop this morning was the idea of like collaboration and information flowing from, large protocol DAOs through service DAOs and into other DAOs that service DAO is working with. And like, the idea that you don't have to have two large DAOs collaborating directly, but you have these like, almost like meta orgs that sit, on the periphery of a lot of large organizations and like, share context and share knowledge and share experience between those larger DAOs in like a really kind of agile and efficient way. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, I think I agree, and that's part of what I'm quite interested about, but it's also the wider DAO to DAO coordination mechanism. So not just M&A, so Faye and Rari, good example, but actual M&A, actual acquisitions of other communities. Like, how do you acquire a community and bring it into another community and maintain like the vibe, the ethos, but enabling them to rage quit if they want to, like in a coherent, fully transparent way? Super interesting. Like, how do you create co-liquidity pools? How do you enable communities to like communicate better, in a really open way on like super interesting shit? And I think that's that like whole DAO to DAO space, which the DAOists are obviously doing a bit with their diplomats. Prime did a really interesting launch from 4 of their different protocols. But I think that DAO to DAO space, which partly touches on what Callum said about like creating like more touch points, and that might be a service DAO that sits in between, or it might be a direct function or tool. But I think we need more of that, like best practice generally, and then that could help for like the investment DAO or that fund of funds model. Actually, which I'm slightly bearish on, I must admit, because it's like, how do you in investing in a DAO? Like, you have to be really clear on like whose role is what, whose role is deal origination, who's going to add value to that, who's doing the DD, is the DD done in the right way? If someone half does it and then disappears, like what happens to that? Who picks it up? How do I accrue more value as like portfolio companies grow? And if I brought one deal, do I get more than the other? If someone else is mentoring, what's the arbitration process? process if that deal wasn't done. Like all of these things, I don't think anybody's got it right. So I think there's like, we need to take a bit more time. But I think the proliferation like on platforms like Syndicate, which enable like the spinning up of these clubs, like sitting aside the like legislation question on like, which James has given his view on. I think, yeah, that's really interesting as well.
So obviously most DAOs like aren't securities, they're completely utilities, right? And we're promised the idea of headless organizations. So in that way, if we have multiple service DAOs, and there's not really like a core team of a CEO, let's say, right? It's just a bunch of service DAOs coming in and contributing to different aspects of what's going on, then it might be like quote unquote decentralized.
Service DAOs are hard, right? You're bankless, consulting, DAO masters, whoever you are. You're going to another community, especially if they're a DAO, and saying, we can help your DAO. And that DAO's like, we're a fucking DAO. We built this. We don't need you to tell us. We can figure it out on our own. And there's this, I think we should all like have, like, just let our egos go a little bit. And like, if someone does something really well, like Shreyas and the Llama community, like did treasury management really well. So everyone was like, they're a fantastic service entity, not quite DAO, but like, we want them to support us. If that was a DAO or a DAO function, why can't they help other DAOs? Like, people are really happy with Wildfire or FireEye come and help them with their like Metagovernance, because they're like, oh yeah, they know what they're doing. But lots of service DAOs do also know what they're doing, Raid Guild and others. And like, if they're not in that top tier, people like the shaking of the head of coming to you, like, then like, let's just enable them to give something a shot if they and have a high conviction. But I think a lot of DAOs say absolutely not, because we're a DAO and we'll do it ourselves. And maybe we need a little bit more experimentation. Again, goes back to full circle to what we said. Like, it's a difficult decision to make, because you're like, oh, we're giving funds to someone that like is going to come and maybe improve this or completely decimate it.
Any thoughts?
I was just going to push back on the Raid Guild example because I wanted to jump up earlier when you were talking about how they're really loud. Need to be louder? Okay. When you were talking about like DAOs sharing the tooling strategies and how to help each other with the similar problems, it's like that's what Raid Guild needs, like hands down. Like our treasury management's kind of messed, and like how to actually continue to spend wisely and invest in the things that are going to draw back to the guild, and how to retain people. Like, there's so many things that we need help with. So I would push back on the example that we like figured it out. I think we need help. And it's like, how do we find those pathways to get that feedback coming back?
I think what I was saying is you built a reputation for Raid Guild being a good community of people who do product or strategy quite well. The same way that LexDAO built up a sort of legal advisory like reputation, and then people would turn quite happily to pay $600 or whatever it was to like be consulted by to see if that can benefit their DAO. And I don't think there's many service DAOs in that layer of like have a good enough reputation for other DAOs to consider their services. So
I think that's fair. I think it's good to have that visibility, but also it's like not to rest on the laurels, and how to like okay, if it has a good reputation, if a DAO has a good reputation, not to be seen as perfect or like this is the gold standard, and be able to get help and not like, I guess you said like have an ego about it. Like, I don't know how to solve that though.
Yeah, agree. Hard problem. On a point I was thinking about before on the like legislation framing of a DAO is, have you guys seen the thing that came out from the US government the other day of like, maybe someone remembers the name like, but basically the government said, hello, this is a DAO and all token voters owners are responsible for this. You guys know the example I'm talking about? There was basically an example where the US government said like last week that, you know of it? Oh no. That said, if you had voted in this protocol, you are responsible. Luke, what? Uki? Yeah. Anyway, so an example, last week where this happened, in my perspective, it's like, good luck. Like, go ahead. If you seriously think you're going to come after anyone that's ever voted on a blockchain that's accessible all over the world through whatever VPN you want, sure, try and do that. But I just don't think that, like, I've yet to see a DAO come under fire from the government that wasn't a scam. Sure, if Kim Kardashian is promoting a straight up scam, like, yes, we should go after these people. But if it's just a community doing cool things, I find it very, very hard to believe that there will be serious repercussions for anyone participating in that ecosystem.
Just to touch back on the service DAO point, I think we just need more, right? Like, you could probably count the amount of service DAOs that are active in the space on two hands, and maybe 80% of them have representation in this building right now. Like, we just need more people doing this. There's just not enough like experimentation, and I think to what you said, the DAOs need to be more open to it and more like willing to let service DAOs, let new contributors come in and like give it a shot and learn. And then also more collaboration between service DAOs, which is something Shadi and I were talking about earlier, this idea of like service DAO coalitions, which is super interesting, but I think is very infant stage, so we have to build that out before we talk about it.
And again, just like more of them. I mean, that was the idea for FireEye's launching Wildfire. As you know, FireEye's, there was 4 of us that were doing these amazing token launches, which is cool, but we're not trying to build like this like BlackRock, McKinsey consulting company that we can sit on and have a multi-trillion-dollar valuation in the future, right? We're trying to make Ethereum better. That is all we're trying to do. And so Wildfire was like, how do we do that in a meaningful way? Well, hopefully we can start this Wildfire and bring in all these, people and sort of under what we do and show them the way that we do it and try and share that information so that then eventually they can consume us, right? And they can be better than us and do that in a better way, because right now there's just not enough people doing it.
Okay, we have about 20 minutes left, so I'm going to spend 10 minutes. I would like you guys to speak about your biggest failures and challenges that you've come across while creating these delegate systems, especially the in-your-face fuck-ups, like, oh my god, how do we not think about this?
I mean, I think it's been talked about before, but like the lack of technical upgradability and like modularity, I think is the biggest failure that we have.
Yeah, I think initial buy-in from communities where you come in as a delegate, whether as an individual or as a group, to say, oh, no, we really do care about this community. We want to add value and like we want to work with you, and getting very little traction from that, and then having to go and search people down and then ask all the existing delegates to ask other people to get involved. Like, there's got to be a better way of doing that. And a hello world or a white paper just isn't going to cut it anymore. So, yeah, that's probably quite a difficult challenge for new communities.
Yeah, I mean, I guess like communicating them, I think like there's been obviously some DAOs that have launched really well and been communicated really well, but there's been a lot that were like, oh, we're a DAO, but we also have a company, and the company takes some of the value, but then we pass it to the, like not DX DAO, what's the, what? DYDX, right? They launched it and they're like, okay, all the fees are going to the company, but we have this token which is meant to be a DAO. Like I think there's a lot of situations where they were just launched in like a way that they needed to be more peaceful or communicative about it.
I think to build on the like technical failures, it's we've talked a lot about like the Governor Alpha like large DAO problem that this has created, but even in things in the Moloch ecosystem with writing the Moloch V1 code, which was like extremely small, meant to be bulletproof so that it didn't break. And then the V2 code came out, which gave us a lot more like optionality on what we could do, but it was still designed to be strong and unbreakable so that we didn't lose all the money. And now with the V3 code, it's built, I think, in a way that, we've taken all of those failures and those learnings and built it so that it does integrate with Gnosis Safe. It works with Snapshot. It works with, all of these different, governance tooling jigsaw pieces. But even now, from the Metacartel Ventures standpoint, upgrading and like migrating, the $7 million in the on-chain treasury, plus what's in the multi-sig, plus the 75 members from one smart contract to another is still like an incredibly scary concept. So like that's something that we're like actively working on now, but I think it's something that will continue to be a problem for DAOs more broadly.
Big lover of Ethereum and of course Solidity, but I think there's a elephant in the room that we have to address, which is Solidity is like pretty insecure, and now there's new EVMs coming out like Move, etc., which secures this, and I feel like a lot of fundamentals of what's going on is dodgy. Okay, do we have any questions from our lovely audience? Hello? No, not you. You just sat down. Do we have any questions or thoughts?
It's been really interesting, and I know it's really long, and we have a little bit more time, so I'm trying to squeeze what we can, but thanks very much for doing this. I have two thoughts to share with you and to get your opinion on. One is how DAOs share, communicate to the community or to naive users or to first-time users what is going on, like public audits of the contract, really like the alarm bells about what you should pay attention to and kind of work in that field. I'm just curious about what you think about it, this communication. I'm sure that you're thinking about this a lot. And the other thing is, it's a little bit of a broader conversation, so if you want, you can answer it or just disregard me, but one of the dreams of this thing was direct democracy, loose administration, something really simple. We can vote and influence different things, or maybe to ask this in a different way. If let's take the example of the United States, the Federation. Let's say that we would design the United States now, and we would have all these DAO tools and decentralized, and we'll make a full, a loose federation that can communicate with each other, but we want to make it, I don't know, thinking about this kind of...
Yeah, I mean, making the whole US government again with DAOs, like, seems cool. Like, I'm into it. I think, again, we probably need a few more years of technical development. I think, like, a few more DAO tools, a little more coordination before we try and tackle, like, government-sized problems. But definitely, I think, like, the idea of, like, hyper-localized DAOs, that's how I think we fix the world. It's like, basically you have a community of, like, 10, 20, 50, whatever people that are in, like, a very small community, and they go around and say, hey, if you clean up this rubbish, we'll give you $10. Hey, we're hosting an event next week. Do you want to come and get involved? Like, humans, this idea of, like, being ever connected but never connected, right? It's like, you're always on the internet, you're always online, but, like, human connection has gone up massively in the past, like, 100,000 years, whatever. And so how can we sort of, like, reinstantiate that with digital tools? 100%, I think, like, government structures over a long time period will be eaten from the inside out by, like, tribe-like communication, coordination through DAOs.
Yeah, I think when DAOs first came about, everybody thought about them as like the next stage of like companies, right, or corporations. And we've had a recent renaissance on the sort of like how do we think about them as nation states. And if anyone hasn't read Balaji's Network States, fully recommend it. Agree with a lot of the whole idea of digital states. And I think there's a lot we can learn from, like, we imagine governments, we imagine nations, whether at the federal or the local level. And so these are like human conditions. And in the same way that we created corporations. And there's not enough of a bridging between taking the best of like both and creating new structures. And I think either you come, so I used to be a diplomat with the British government, so I spent time in the machine working around the world, and I've seen how that is a fucking terrible machine in lots of ways. But I've also worked in Web3 for several years and seen how that is also failing in lots of ways where governments do things quite well. And how can we break down all those boundaries, ironically, and create just like better coordination structures that don't necessarily have to inherit, like, this is the Web3 version of a corporate structure, right? How can we just reimagine digital and network states collectively across the world, and in a way that will get buy-in from the existing structures? Otherwise, we are going nowhere, which is my only contention with what Balaji's talking about, because he basically says that, all we think we need is diplomatic recognition, and then a nation state can be, or network state can exist. And you're like, well, look what's happened to major communities like the Kurds or non-recognized peoples around the world who are not countries. Like, this is not an easy process. And I think that more time needs to be spent on that from a recognition standpoint to then give more like validity to what we're trying to do as a use case. So I'd like to see like more bridging, more people coming together from diverse schools of thoughts and like chucking ideas back into the mix and experimenting.
I mean, I think James just put that incredibly well. I think, like, to speak again to like the rebuilding the US thing, it would end up like just as complicated. I think it would end up with better incentives and like more productivity and more like alignment, but it's still incredibly complicated to coordinate huge amounts of people. So like, this like direct democracy, flat org idea, I think is like kind of, it's like a little, I don't know the word. Just it's not realistic, right? Like, when you got so many people to coordinate, you just have to have some level of like, organization, some level of hierarchy, some level of like responsibility between people.
You're gonna add to this? One second. You're gonna add to this? Okay.
Just an interesting. So I think the example that was used was like the United States Federation, right? And if you think about a country as large as the United States or like India or these big federated countries, there are a lot of different peoples with very different interest groups, right? And so but I do think thinking about government and this kind of thing is interesting, and maybe it makes more sense to think about like Singapore, right? Or, like Switzerland. I mean, that's still, or New Zealand, right? There are small countries that are much more homogenous, and that's probably where you start to figure out like how to do the DAO thing. And then this thing about federation between DAOs is something we still have to figure out ourselves, right? But like maybe once you have a bunch of little DAOs, then we can start thinking about like the united federation of DAOs. Yeah.
Oh, right. Yeah, I want to touch on James' point a bit on you want to shift people from creating DAOs to work on more like on the foundations and infrastructure around DAOs. But as far as I know, there are a lot of like people doing like DAO tooling, DAO infrastructure out there that don't get adopted by major DAOs, right? And on the other hand, I think like when DAOs actually do their own kind of like tools, they also don't get adopted by other DAOs. Like, do you have any kind of like suggestions for those that are building like the foundations or infrastructure? How do you actually like approach that in order to get adoption from DAOs?
Yeah, it's a great question. Like, you know, FWB did a good job there. Like, they were like, cool, we need to nucleate a tool because it doesn't exist, and actually we understand the problem more intimately. So we whipped that up, and that was like, okay, great, that works, but it won't work in other communities. And then there's other tools that come in and then have to convince communities that actually they work. And then after a number of use cases, more people start to use them. So I think it's like everything, right? Experimentation needs to be the name of the game. A lot of communities more intimately understand their problems than a lot of others and can nucleate better tools. But at the same time, like a spectator also might see more of the game. So they might be building a really interesting tool that community hasn't considered. So I do think we need both, but we need a mindset shift, which is we should be open to both, right? And then enable the community to like experiment with different types and also and then decide which one is of the most benefit to that respective community. And like that to me is a better functioning organization of people where everyone's just putting themselves like out there and saying, yeah, I didn't quite get this, or I'm not convinced by it, and like that's okay, right? But I think the same is like people want to seem more knowledgeable than they are on lots of things. It goes back to like if I'm in a DAO and people are delegating to me about a decision that I don't really know, but I should know, that's the really, really dangerous thing, right? Because then people start to make decisions because they feel like they have to, and then the sheep stuff starts. So I think just like more honestly, like we're all advocates of like open, transparent communities. Like let's be slightly more open and transparent ourselves, and then hopefully we'll get better, more open, transparent tooling that is always more composable. Like we do need better horizontal tools, and everyone is wanting to, like the thing that pisses me off a lot is I never really want to be a founder, quite frankly. I like being a contributor, the glue. I like bridging things, right? And I'm okay with that. But everyone wants to be a founder in this space. Everyone wants to have started a DAO, started a tool, started a company, which is cool, and love founders. But like if you're not a founder, really embrace that. Like, you know, like Malcolm X, MLK wouldn't be who they were if Maya Angelou wasn't in the room enabling that coordination. Like, let's have more fucking Maya Angelou's in Web3.
Yeah, plus one of that. Good point. And I think, like, I mean, to touch on that as well, is I think that, like, that is the thing, is that actually, like, and even the DAO tooling solutions is, like, yes, you know, some of them might be doing this blanket slate, trying to get sort of buy-in from these DAOs. Maybe some of them just suck, you know, and maybe that's actually, like, they just weren't actually very good at doing cool things. And that's just, like, a process that we have to go through, is having a bunch of DAOs use a bunch of shitty tooling is eventually going to land up in, you know, new tooling being developed. And again, you know, let's be clear, is that the first DAO was in 2017. That was really cool, right? Then we got, Griff Green quote again, is we got PTS DAO for a lot of years, right? Basically until like 2019 before anyone talked about it. And then the end of 2019 before there was anything cool going on. So there's been like 2 years, you know, 2 years of this stuff going on, maybe a little bit more if you push it. That is a very, very short amount of time when you think about the history, you know, how much history is inside of like even corporate governance, which is maybe 100 years, you know, human coordination, which is like millions of years. You know, there is a lot of these different mechanisms to go on, and 2 years is a very short time. So like, I'm not worried. By the time I'm 60, it'll be solved. No problem.
Yeah, plus one. I think to the DAO tooling question, a lot of those projects, you know, tried to solve DAO tooling, right? As in, like, there's this one problem, DAOs don't work very well, let's solve for that, and let's just build everything. Whereas I think that the solution to that, and what we're even seeing more now, you know, as we kind of come into the bear market, you know, whatever we're going to call it, is like people building small pieces of technology or of like, you know, infrastructure, of like coordination mechanisms to address one issue that DAOs face, or that a single DAO faces, and like building from that, like, you know, really like grassroots, ground level place to then build into something that's valuable, as opposed to kind of coming with like a top-down view of we're going to fix DAOs.
Okay, we've been sitting down for an hour and 20 minutes, so we're going to wrap this up. It's a long time. Before we go, do we have anything to shill? You hiring? Any projects launching end of January that you want to speak about? Do you have anything to shill?
If you have been interested in what we've talked about here, and you want to get involved in a DAO, you want to get involved in a service DAO, then look on James's Twitter. The pinned tweet is the Wildfire blog post. Jump in the Discord, hang out, chat, and contribute. That's my show.
Yeah, we'll plug Wildfire DAO. So coming in and seeing there's the 4 FireEyes guys that started it, and coming in and obviously having the onboarding of Solana is shit and all tokens and securities. Beyond that stuff, everything else was amazing, and it is actually a group of really passionate individuals who are trying to really just help communities across public goods, across creator economies, DeFi, and more. So do come in and jam in the Discord because it's amazing. And then generally Protocol Labs is I've been with them for a year. Amazing company. We're hiring like crazy as always. Across all of our protocols, it's an incredible community. So if you are interested, do hit me up as well. Those 2 things I'll say.
Nice. I think I'll plug, despite, all tokens being securities and Solana being shit, being my opinion, is that I think that that is, what I would shield to you all is be yourself and be genuine in your opinions. And obviously that's, I say that half with jest of the Solana comment, whatever. But that is important, is to actually have a voice. It's not that hard to get involved in any of this stuff. It was 5 years ago, I'm sitting in my house delivering pizza, smoking weed, and researching crypto shit, right? And now we run the largest token launching, service DAO in the entire world. And that is a journey, but everyone is on their own journey, and you can make massive impacts inside of these communities. And so just jump in and get involved, and they will be very appreciated. I'm very, very sure.
Yes, me and James have a very funny origin story. I'm not going to say how we met, but if anyone wants to know the story, you can come to us after and we will...
It sounds so bad.
It was more degenerate than that. Everyone, thank you so much for listening. If you're looking to join great teams at Protocol Labs or getting involved in the cutting edge of the DAO space, definitely go talk to James and Callum also. We're also hiring like crazy for marketers and biz dev and stuff like this. Thank you so much. Give yourselves a round of applause, everyone.
Thank you for sitting and listening too. Great job.